I've been playing with the Sindoh 3Dwox DP201 with the flexible bed for a while now, but most of my testing has been done with the Sindoh provided desktop slicing software. And I actually prefer Simplify3D, and I'll show you here in a second why, but here's a sample that I printed with the Sindoh software, their desktop software. And I have trouble getting the options set correctly so that it gives me the strength that I get with some of the parts with this Simplify3D. Watch this. These little pegs in my Arduino case on the Sindoh software just snap right off. And I don't have that problem when I use Simplify3D. Here's the same thing printed again, another example with the Sindoh desktop software. Look at these little pegs. Look at that. So there's something wrong either with the options I have set, but there's just a problem with it, and it doesn't happen with Simplify3D. So for that and other reasons, I prefer to want to use Simplify3D. Now here's a print with Simplify3D. Look at that. I removed the raft with one hand, one finger, and it popped right off. Now yes, the surface finish isn't so good here, and that's why I don't want to use a raft at all. But that, with the strength of the pegs and some things, make me want to use Simplify3D. Now one of the problems is whether I'm using Simplify3D or Sindoh, I get this warping on the one edge or the one corner, the back edge of this thing. And several of my prints have done this, and I think it has to do with the adhesion to this flexible bed. So I set out to try to find a way to fix this. So you say print with a brim or a raft. Well, this one I printed with a brim. And here's the problem with printing with the brim. When you go to take it off, it leaves this, kind of white flash score mark along here. It doesn't separate real well. You'd have to touch up with an X-Acto or some sanding or filing. And of course the raft we saw in the last part of that video, on the last one, the raft is sort of, doesn't give you a good finish and has some stringing on the bottom. You got to get the separation distance correct. So I'd really like to print directly on this plate and have it adhere. Now, by the way, look at this. This is a test print built into the Sindoh machine itself, and that left side is definitely warping up, and that has nothing to do with any of the software used for the slicer. So that just shows that, maybe part of it could be that the bed's out of alignment on that side, but I've adjusted it the best I could manually to the distance of a business card between the nozzle and there, and it just still does it. So wanted to come up with a way to fix that. And I just want to show here that printing the same job on the older DP200 that has the heated aluminum bed is no problem. There's no warping. The finish on the bottom obviously is beautiful because it's right on the plate. There's no brim. There's no raft. It just works. Now, again, these little pegs were breaking off. I was doing some tolerance testing on them, but the finish is nice and there's no warping. So without question, the first thing you want to do is go in here and do an automatic bed leveling and let it go through that process just to make sure you're close to where you think the machine thinks you should be. Now it'll check the back center, the four corners, and it'll tell you on this display, rotate the little gears, the little adjustments, several clicks clockwise or counterclockwise. So just do that to get yourself close. Now at this point, you might want to do a manual bed leveling and check, that your adjustments are on. And I don't exactly know. There's this Z offset, which offsets the nozzle from the bed, and mine seems to work well at like 0.1 or 0.15. But what you do is you say move to that position, and then what it'll do is gyrate around here and go to the center of the bed and adjust the Z axis to that offset. And I believe typically it's 0.25 from the factory. And watch here, it'll pull the bed up, get real close. And then what you want to do is you want to check with a business card and just have a little bit of tension on that it hits there. And like I said, mine, I adjusted it down to 0.1, maybe 0.15. And then, you can say move and check it again. And then when you're done, you hit save and it'll save it in that position. But I was never really sure. That doesn't exactly say that it's going to do the four corners and make them an adjustment. So the only thing I really found to do is go into this XYZ and jog the head, use these controls to jog the head around the bed, sort of to the extremes of the four corners where I'm going to print, and then make the adjustments accordingly. And again, this is just a reasonableness test, but I found it gets you closer than trying to do it with the automatic. So see, I'll just jog the head over here, and I can move the bed in and out. And again, take my business card, which is about 0.25, and then pull the bed, keep hitting up until it comes up as far as it can go, and it won't go anymore, and then check it. And just move the head around in the different locations and check if you think the tension on there is just pretty good. And you don't have to go to extremes because you're not going to be printing over there in that corner. And it's not going to be perfect, but then you just adjust that little green knob to get your tension. And I felt that, do that and it works pretty well. You can't adjust the back very easily. You can just do those 2 green knobs in the front corners and hope for the best. Because of this flexible build plate, there is there's more tolerance that has to be built into your print to keep it level. And that's what we'll talk about doing here. Okay, so here we are in Simplify3D. I have my model up here, and this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where I'm going to tell you what I did to make it work so that I can print directly on the bed. I can use Simplify3D as my slicer, and I can avoid significant warping on the edges while printing on the DP201 on the flexible bed. Okay, so I sort of alluded to it here, but over here on the left is where you're going to see the main thing that I came up with. And again, you guys may be a genius at this, you're much better at it and have ideas, but I'm just going to tell you what works for me in hopes that it helps somebody, because I had problems with this. Basically what I'm going to do is we're going to have 2 different processes here, and that's the baseline of why this thing works. The first process is going to be used certain settings to print the first layer. We know that first layer is very critical for adhering to the bed. So we're going to adjust some things in that to make that first layer adhere, print directly on the bed. Then for layers 2 and up, we're going to go to another process. So let's just look at some of the settings here. Now we'll look at the first process. This one had the most changes done to it. You can slow this video down, and you can look at the parameters here and write them down, but again, it might vary a little for yours. This gives you some place to start. Now what I did is I made up a profile process and saved it, but it's for my PLA material for my Sindoh. And here's what happened. The nozzle diameter is 0.4. That's physical to the machine. But that first layer, I'm going to print with an extrusion multiplier how much filament's coming out of the head, out of the nozzle. I'm going to go at 1.3, 130%. So I'm pushing more through there for that first layer. And look at this. My extrusion width, which typically you probably have this set at the same as the nozzle diameter, the 0.4, I bumped it up to 1 millimeter for each line on that first width. Now that's going to give it it's going to adhere better to the bed because it's a thicker line. The retraction, I left at what Sindoh suggests for normally in their software. Retract 12 millimeters at 12 millimeters per second. Turned off all this stuff right now. I'm not worried about it, and the prints come out pretty good. Let's go to the next tab. Okay, the primary layer height, I leave at 0.2. And here's where you really got to think about this stuff. This is just for that first layer. So you want one bottom solid layer, and you can get away with 2 shells right here, but these are the kind of things you're probably going to have to adjust over time for each project. And first layer settings, I let the layer height at 100%, which is a little different, the width at 100%, and the first layer speed at 40%. Okay, that's what I did for that. Now I'm going to print a brim. The reason that it's a brim is because the offset from the part is 0 millimeters. I'm going to do 1 layer high, and the skirt outlines 5. So I'm going to have a 5 millimeter brim around the outside of my project on that first layer. The interior fill percentage for that first layer I have set to 0 because it's going to be solid. And you can just look at the parameters here. I didn't change this stuff very much. No supports. Temperature at the Sindoh suggested 200 Celsius starting at layer 1, and you want to remove your temperature controller for any fans in here. or not fans, I'm sorry, for the heated bed, because the DP201 does not have a heated bed. Cooling. It works, okay? You can play with it. This is how I have it set up. Layer 1 at 12%, layer 2 at 25%. Whatever, get to layer 2, probably not, because we're only doing layer 1, but it works. Now, G-code I did nothing to other than the defaults. Here's where you have to think, okay? Sindoh provided some starting script G-code that you were to place in here. And one of the options they had in here, I can't remember where it was, but it was somewhere in here, and it was like G107 or something like that. And it said turn the fan off. And when you generated the G-code, it would turn the fan off that was supposed to cool the nozzle. And then there was some interaction with back here on this. It would actually turn the fan completely off when you looked at the G-code, and it never turned back on. So I think that's part of this, you know, it was out of order. You thought this would run, but it would turn the fan off, and it would do the layer 1, and then it would turn the fan off. So I think by putting layer 2 in here, it turns the fan back on. Okay, so just do it this way, and you'll have your fan running. Take that, use this, but take that G107 out of there. I believe it was G107. It said fan off behind it. Take that out of there. And there's no ending script because you're right in the middle of your project. You're only on layer 1. You're just starting, you're printing layer 1, and then no ending script right now. You're going to hand this off to process 2, which is going to continue and have the ending script in that. Okay, my default printing speed for my first layer, 40 millimeters per second. You can look at the parameters here. I slowed down my actual movement speed to 30 just because I was getting a little smearing, and it's like, it's the first layer. This works, leave it go. This stuff shouldn't really matter. Now, this is very critical. Look at this. This is our first layer. So start printing. Well, if you leave that unchecked, it'll just start at the beginning, the lowest layer. Stop printing, and you have to put in here at what millimeters. Now, my layer height is 0.2. So I'm going to stop printing after that first layer of 0.2. Okay, that's how it knows how to stop. Ooze control, right now I just have force retraction between layers turned on, and as you see here, I turned this off for the first layer, this minimal retraction. And that is it for this first layer, okay? That will print the first layer. Now, there's much less changes to the second process. I'll click on that and say edit process. This is for layers 2 and up. Okay, so this is pretty standard for the Sindoh software. Okay, 0.4, 1% or 100% on the extrusion multiplier, 0.4 here, 12 and 12 with retraction, 0.2. Now think about this. This is your bottom solid layers at the start of layer 2. So this is on top of your first layer, which you already printed in this process. So you got to kind of think through, how many of these do you want? And how many do you want at the top of your project? Now your shells, your outlines, you know, your perimeters, they're smaller now. They're 0.4, not 1 millimeter anymore. So you have to think how many you want there. 100% on all this stuff. No skirt or brim, that'll confuse you, but no, we're up in midair. We're in the second layer. This is not the first layer. This is for layers 2 and above. So none of this stuff. Now you can have infill if you want. No sports. Same with your temperature. Now your cooling at this point, you know, you've already set your base layer down. So just go with 50% on your fan. Now look here, we talked about this. No starting script because that was over here at the beginning of layer 1, but you will have an ending script when it gets totally to the top. And Sindoh says use an M2. Now just default printing speed at 40. Now I can move a little faster at 60 because I'm up in those other layers. Here again, critical. Start printing at 0.2, you know, after that first layer, and just go through as high as this thing is. And here I made some adjustments with the minimal and the only retract. Okay. So you do that. And I know it's a little detail, but that way you guys understand what my thought process was. Now, when I prepare to print, I got to select all my processes for my model so that it does both of them. Okay, now look, at least at this level, which you guys are familiar seeing, you can see our brim and how it's going to do it. But what's nice is make sure this is drugged the whole way over here, down here at the bottom, so you're seeing all of it, and go to View, Cross Section. Now what you can do is look at this on the Z-axis, so you can bump this up. There's 0.1. So, you know, this first layer, you can see it's going to put 5 of these, and it does these 1 millimeter strokes on here. So it's a nice, fat, over extruded 130%, 1 millimeter to make that adhere and squish down into there. And then as you go up, look how the lines get finer. See? Because now you're at a 0.4. See these green lines? You're at a 0.4, but here's this 1 millimeter, how thick they were. And this all, at least on mine, this all kind of mushes together. I mean, you can adjust this. Just don't get too far out. Look, here's some infill. And there we go. So you just step up like you're used to, and you can see the whole thing as it's printing up there. Okay? I guess some of you guys aren't familiar with this. I'll talk about it now. Now that you have this, you just save your toolpath. Okay? Save it somewhere, top case, whatever. It'll save the G code, and then load your 3Dwox software. And I always get that error. They haven't figured that out. And now you don't load your project into here, you file load G code. And you want to go load that G code that you just made. And it brings it in, and there's no preview, right? But it does show the 3Dwox is online. And you just hit print, and it'll send the job over. Okay, let's hit the print button. Is there an object on my bed? No. Hit print, go. Now get into the habit of running over to your printer real quick, clicking this button here. It's basically saying it can't print the G code, but if you click that, see now the pause and the stop buttons appear at the bottom. And then if something goes wrong, you can stop it. If you don't do that, those buttons never appear and you have to power off the machine in case you have a problem. Okay, so it's going to start our print here now. And what we should see if everything goes well is a nice fat bead. Yeah, look at that. This first layer is a nice fat 1 millimeter smushed down on there. And that's what we want. That was the whole goal here. But what's cool is it'll print this brim around here, which will hit the side of my print and attach to it and help hold it down for warping. But the bottom layer of my print is right on this bed. So I'm not going to have, you know, that raft and some of that problem with the quality of the print. It'll be nice and flat and smooth on this bed when it comes off. All right, let's just wait for a bit. And that's what we want. Just keep an eye on it when it does this first layer and make sure that it's laying down. And then after that, it'll just keep going and you should be fine. Now fast forward a little bit through the magic of video. Here's one that was already printed. Yes, it's a different color filament, but I had already had it done. Look at this. No warping on the edges or corners to speak of. Nice, fat, flat bead down there. And I didn't have my tripod with me, so I was doing handheld on the camera, and I only had one hand free. But using that, I was able to peel this off of this flexible bed with only one hand free. Sort of. Wasn't that bad. But check this out. I was actually able to get this started and pull this brim right off of here with a beautiful edge on it, and I used one hand to do that. How about that? Look at the quality there. And the surface that was down on the bed is beautiful because there was no raft or anything between it. Pretty sweet. Now here's a larger print I did. Big flat print, so I figured that would be susceptible to warping on the edges, and it did a little, but it didn't peel up off of there. And actually looking at it on the video here, it looks more warped and worse than it did when I pulled it off, so maybe it was just I had the camera down low. But it's not perfect, but I mean, seriously, I mean, that was a big print that took up most of the bed, and it's real thin on the bottom there, so I'm real happy with that. It would not have done this on the heated bed of the DP200. Wouldn't have warped at all, but this is not a heated bed. This flexi bed is different. So I think this is well on my way to getting this thing figured out. Now here's a hole size guide that I tried to print before. This is without using my new process. See, before, that's what started me on this. It was all warped up because it was a real long, thin piece. So let's try that with the new process. Looks pretty good so far. The edges are still held down. Corners are down. You know, the bed itself is possibly warped a little bit in the middle. So what do you expect? You're printing on this thing which is not 100% perfect. See if I can get this one off of here. Well, let's go for it. Let's see what happens if we try to peel off this little brim with one hand. Can we get it started? Yeah. I think we got her. Pull it. Yeah, see, you can't do that with a normal brim, so this process is pretty nice. Again, this would go easier with two hands. Look at that. That's pretty darn flat. I mean, I don't know how high that is, but that's a thin piece, pretty big, minimal warping, if any at all. Sweet. Now, another thing I like about this machine is the consistency and repeatability on the tolerances is really good. These are printed at 2 separate jobs at different days, and they fit together just fine with, I don't know, like a 0.5 millimeter clearance or something like that on the pegs. Real nice fit. Perfectly acceptable for what I'm doing. I did what I could to test this over a couple machines, and the process seems to be pretty good. I'm not saying it's perfect, and maybe you guys have some ideas, but as you can see, I got a couple machines sitting around here to do some testing with, so it's worked out okay. Of course, it isn't without error. Everyone has this box, right? This box of filament, broken filament, and parts that didn't come out right that you just kind of keep and figure out what you're going to do with them someday. Yep, got one of them too. But here are just a few of the successful jobs I've printed with my 3Dwox printers over the last year or so. It's a great machine, great quality, and I really enjoy using it. So I hope this video has been informative and useful to you, and hopefully entertaining as well. And thanks for watching.